Hello everyone, Kenty Tiger here with Bengali Engineering and Play. We are back in Space Engineers and continuing on in our Survival Series 2. So as you see the junk pile here in front, if you remember from the last screen, we crashed at the end, which is this graphics driver thing, which I'll just stop right there. Space Engineers, which can't handle the third or fourth highest capable graphics cards on the market. So anyway, um, we crashed, which meant I really had to come back in and kind of do a few things. So let me go ahead and while I'm thinking about it, save the world. One of the things that happened was I had the original tree topper out here, which was the top of the station. To kind of describe where this was going. Sorry, I got the sun in your eyes there. Where this was going. So this was the main deck here of the top, and which is to say the station top. This was the viewport, I think, was on the inside of the station, so you could see everything. And then this is where the tunnels actually connected in. And obviously a lot of stuff here. The reactors, everything else that were here. This was kind of the control station, which sat above floor level. On these, there were four tunnels which went out in four different directions in the center of the station. So the tree topper here, which is this assembly here, normally sorry, I got the sun in your eyes again. Normally I try and avoid kind of reusing builds, but there's a couple things, and I know this sounds a totally arrogant statement here. There are things that you build, and of course if you do any sandbox game building at all, there are those builds which you just say, wow, this is really epic, and that's not to say this particular item is epic in any discernible way. It's just neat. I like it. So what I wanted to do is basically reuse this concept. Obviously I'm going to have to modify it, and so what this particular video is really about is you're just kind of along for the ride while I modify this thing. So the questions are, where is this going to go? What is the actual intention of this thing? So we're going to take a little bit of time to do some grinding. And actually, before I do that, I guess I need to I may or may not be able to do this. Oh, it does. Okay, this does have two batteries built in. I have no idea what the level of charge on the batteries are, but so this basically is there is in this module actually was a great centralized module. So it has batteries. In fact, it's got 8 batteries. It has a medical station. I think it's on the number 2 side. Yep. So it's right over there. It's kind of hard to see, but it's over there. So the 1 and 3 side actually have the reactors as well as the oxygen generators are on the 1 and the 3 side, and the number 2 side has a medical bay. The number 3 side doesn't have anything. It's just, or sorry, the number 4 side. So this is this particular unit has power. It has battery. It has a tiny little bit of storage that's literally for fuel and ice. So a small container that's built into the guts of it. You couldn't even see it, which is why I didn't point it out earlier. But it's because it's all interconnected into the green, then it works. Now, in this case, the the interconnections between this top, otherwise useless piece here are there, which is to say this top um, conveyor system. So this does actually plumb into the green. That was the intention. Um, you know, it was originally, it was supposed to supply um, air. Was an air draw capability, which is why that was there, and then that bottom one was the global system. So the idea, pointing way up here at the top, is we're not going to continue the the tri conveyor system, and the reason for that is there's really no reason to do it. So I think effectively what I'm going to do with this top is to have, my thought was this thing would have, let me go ahead and bring one in world. I didn't do that. Mount base. And the yes here is actually buttons and sectans signs. So what I need to do is get far enough out here that this plays a role, and what I need to do is just make sure I'm putting these. There we go. Oh nope, that go that way. And then roll this out a little ways so I can actually put it in some place that makes a certain amount of sense. All right, so we'll place that in the world. We're not going to use these immediately, but the idea was this would be kind of a top level thing that would be the last thing on the top of the station before we have the Christmas tree chopper, which is this guy here. So ultimately, we would terminate the pull-in system as well as the fuel ice system. So we would basically continue this on only this guy. And what I want to do is a very simple how do I a very simple connection methodology that would basically terminate those two. And whether I continue on, I mean, if I want to utilize the pull-in system or the fuel ice system, then I logically connect onto here. So, you know, this thing was designed to take everything in and send it out. So it's basically a 6-direction junction. And is it entirely flexible to do whatever? Yes, no. Can it do everything I need it to do? Yes. Is it absolutely and completely flexible? Well, the answer is no, because I have 3 different things. So maybe it's the left side I need to pull in, maybe it's the right side I need to pull in, but in this case it's on the left. So this thing, I know it's really hard to say, you know, in space something is right side up or upside down. This thing is actually upside down. So I think the way these were numbered were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8. So in this case, 1 is on the bottom. And does that really matter? No. You know, am I ever going to use, in the case of having a bazillion of these things out here, would I ever use all of them? And I think the answer is no. So maybe, and of course 8. So if we multiply 8 by 4, we come up with 32. So would I ever conceivably have 32 different pods attached onto the station? And that's just getting really, really silly. Do you need that much storage? Do you need that much, really anything? So what I think would be actually much more practical, so why not, let me go ahead and research that idea out, which is really to say I'm going to go grab this piece, and I need to find it. Pods. parts, dual quad base for ground. So we actually have a couple different options here. We have a single ground base. We have a single base for pod construction, which is a blueprint. It's basically a template. It is just, if you look at the thing that the reticle is pointing at, it is just that. That's all there is there. So that is basically to give me the option of basically building anything I want onto a pod base, or to use that as a pod base. So, you know, paste it onto the roof of a station or something like that. Dual mount base or a quad mount base for the ground. So I'm going to copy both of those and bring them into my blueprint directory, and we'll just have a look-see at those. So let me paste those in. Pod mount dual, that's what that looks like, and it was really the idea. So there's a one above, one below. You can't see the one below, but it's there. The idea behind this was to add some flexibility in. I wanted to use this as a cut and paste mechanism, so I could build a pod rack however big I wanted to build it. That's what the purpose of this particular one was. So let me go ahead and delete that. We're not going to use that. And here was the quad base, which may or may not. So this was ground. I'm not sure why that is not pastable as is. All right. So if we look at this, one of the problems that I see with this right off the bat, let me go ahead and spin this around the other way. One of the problems I see right off the bat, and this may this may be this may be the necessity of making two different versions of this. Now, the only difference between these two, or differences, is there's only 4. So I only have the top of the bases. Again, top being relative, and there's no connectors on this end. So I really do like the connectors on this end. So, you know, adding the connectors in, I think is advantageous. It adds some flexibility. So what I would probably do is create a connectorized version, and this isn't just a chopped down version of this one, because so this quad, or the hex, sorry, octo, I'm going completely wrong on you. The octobase here is 1 up, 1 down, and all the odds are on one side, all the evens are on the other side. Now with the signage on this, it would all make sense that you could see where those were, whereas this one, and why does the numbering on the base mean anything? The original one, which is to say the one that the reticle is actually pointing at, is missing some things. One of the things that's missing, there's a couple mods that insert it's basically a small ship button onto large grids. For whatever reason, a single button is not available in the vanilla game, and I have no idea why that is. I found it to be really very useful. So what happened was in my typical OCD fashion, named these pairs of, so obviously you want both merge blocks to release, turn on, turn off, release at the same time. So they work in pairs, and each one of those pairs, in fact, again, picture's worth 1,000 words. And it doesn't matter which one you come into, you're just getting. So pod blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So each one of these groups is talking about pod blocks which are specific to that. The other, this one was remade kind of the same idea. With the pod blocks, and I'm full of shit. I thought I had recreated this to be. Nope, I didn't. I am kind of surprised I didn't, but I didn't. I thought I had renamed all of these as 1, 2, 3, and 4, and in fact I did not. So I'm full of shit. I apologize for that. So the idea here is there was a button next to each one of these, a single button, that would basically toggle power to that pair of merge blocks. So it necessitated having all of those different merge blocks on completely independent groups. That way I could turn them on and off independently. Now, there is an argument that all of the pods, as they are built, have uniquely named merge blocks, which means there's a button on the pod itself. All right, so I know I'm not going to use this because it's easier to keep what I have. So let me go ahead and we're going to delete this. And let me bring a sample of a pod into the world here. Quad foreground. Delete that. And this is just going to be a storage pod. So let me find, and these are all stackable storage pods. But to give you any idea, so the last time I built pods, I built a nanite control factory on a pod, which was either a quad or a dual, depending on how tall you wanted. There were connectors. There's defensive systems, Gatling missile, mixed. There are large reactors, whether it be a single or a dual. There's a large-scale production, which is refineries and assemblers. There is a oxygen and hydrogen production pod. There's a hydroponics module pod that I never. It uses the pod base, or actually it was a specialized connector which ultimately added on to it could interconnect into the pod base. There were solar arrays, which actually they connected on, but they only used so it was basically the two merge blocks with a single conveyor block in the middle. So it did use the same conveyor. The only thing, obviously, a solar panel doesn't need a conveyor, so it just takes a conveyor straight through to the other end. So it's really just a 1 high, 3 wide connector assembly that becomes this solar array, which we I won't use them here because it's facing the wrong direction. The idea is to point, or at least I think will be to point the solar array directly at the sun. So that way I have the maximum available sunlight, collecting the maximum available sunlight. So pods. I was talking about pods here. So let me just grab a cargo pod, and oops, copy. Just so you can see what I mean by pod. So this is not only using. So this is the elsewhere container, and let me. And it's called a stacker for a reason. So let me just, I'll paste it in the world like this. Um, the first thing you notice probably is that there is a somewhat of a base on both sides, and that is true. Now I did have this 90 degrees off, and the reason for that is you see this button panel down here. I'll get to that in just a sec. So the reason why this is called a stackable module is because you can stack them next to each other, so they interconnect. So I can set the bottom, in this case, onto a pod mount, and then stack another pod on top of this. So it basically has a pod mount on a pod. So pods. Anyway, in this case, there's a pod on the bottom here. So it's this consistent format of 3 in a row, and then the 2 merge blocks on the outside. And this one again is this non-emergible, which is to say, not permanent merging, because my merge blocks can turn off. Now, in this case, the merge blocks themselves are uniquely named, and they are coded into this thing. So if we get, let me turn on my HUD. So this is blocks lower. Okay, so and this one happens to be blocks upper. Oh, batteries! I'm full of shit again. So this is blocks lower and blocks lower. Okay. Oh, blocks upper. It does say blocks upper. I have to zoom my eyes in enough to see it. What does that mean? Well, I can turn off these particular merge blocks, which means my ability to turn off the pod base merge blocks kind of becomes irrelevant. So I don't really have to worry about being able to turn these on and off, because if I turn these off, this pod is still going to separate. So that's the idea there. So in this case, the pods, this happens to be a 3x3. So this one happens to be 3x3x5 because I have basically a pod mount on both sides. In one case, it's the connector side, and in the other case, it provides the base for the next pod that you want to attach on here. But each pod has, so we see 2 rows of what looks like small containers. These are actually elsewhere containers. So we have 2 rows, which would be 18, and then we have an additional 6. So 3 and 3. So 18 plus 6 is 24. So we have 24 containers that are elsewhere containers. What do I mean by elsewhere containers? It's a block that I stole the model of a small, large grid block. So the 1x1x1 block, and renamed it and basically set it as an infinite storage. And what do I mean by infinite storage? I took it out to the limit of the game at the time I made it, which may or may not be the limit of the game. It probably still is, because there's no reason to go beyond that. I don't know exactly how many bits that happen to be, but how many liters. The liters worked out to about 9 trillion liters. It was about 9.4 trillion liters. In fact, these all have something in them, which means I'm going to go into inventory. So you can't actually see, but you see this has about 8 trillion liters in it. And that's mostly actually because of these. So you can see the volume here is about 2.9, almost 3 trillion liters in the 8 billion kilograms of ice. Okay, so mass, the mass looks ridiculously low, and in fact it is. Part of my mod changes mass. I did that on purpose. Mass is all fine and dandy, but the kilonewtons versus mass versus the application of force in this game I don't want to say physics is broken, because they've done a lot to improve physics into the real world application. So the application of force and everything, but um, the and I don't want to turn this into a rant, um, but let's take a convention that is used in space engineers. So thrusters can be in any one of 6 directions. Okay, that's it, 6 directions. But the way the physics works in space engineers is you calculate a center of mass. Okay, based on the build, you have a calculated center of mass, and that center of mass might be off a lot from where it is. But because it's a calculated center of mass, and I know why they did this, they did it for simplicity, and I absolutely understand. But if you get into pure mechanical engineering for mechanical engineering, application of force is always a moment arm equation. Now, for those of you who don't understand what I mean by moment arm, application of force is always going to be, if we go back to Newton's laws, right? The application of force is always going to exert force around a center of mass. If center of mass is not centered, then you're going to have this moment arm effect. Moment arm meaning how long is your moment arm, your lever, from where that physical center of mass happens to be versus where this application of force or thruster happens to be. So the reason why we calculate this center of mass is for simplicity. Okay, if I have, let's just say I have 20 different thrusters in any given direction, spread out over the course of the entire base of my, let's say it's a behemoth battleship. Okay, if we get into physics and physics calculations, each thruster provides a constant, consistent amount of force, which is to say a calculatable amount of force. However, because of center of mass being what it is, if we were to calculate independently moment arms for every single thruster calculated back to the center of mass, then I have an unequal amount of force being applied in however many different directions. So let's say I have 20 thrusters, I have a calculated center of mass. Every single one of those thrusters is going to be either a differential distance or a symmetrical, because we may have them in pairs, but either way they're going to be asymmetrical in the amount of force applied. So even though it's a planar force, those forces are going to be applied differently because of the moment arm. The longer the moment arm, the larger the twisting force is, which is exactly what moment arm equations are all about. So I could actually change the planar attitude because of this unequal application of force. So not only would we have to calculate every single one of those and then calculate direction based on, or rather directional change of a plane based on those differentials in force, we simplified all that. So it's basically every thruster applies unilateral force, which is to say its force directly onto the center of gravity, the center of mass. Okay, that way I don't have to calculate moment arms for any of this. I apply it directly to the center of mass. The only calculation that happens is a per grid. I calculate the center of mass, which is all 3 directions simultaneously, all 3 axes simultaneously. Boom, done. One calculation, or rather a trio of calculations that ultimately end up as one sum, whatever that one value is, and then I apply force symmetrically on that. So if I add 5 thrusters, it doesn't matter. Each one of those thrusters applies a unilateral force simultaneously and exactly parallel. No moment arms at all. So anyway, the weight, which is to say mass versus thrust, became a real issue when you get into large scale. So I used to build a lot of transport ships. And the problem with transport ships is when they introduced mass, which is really to say mass actually had an effect on thrust, then all of a sudden, better than half, probably about 80% of my freighters no longer worked. You literally could not develop enough thrust. This was back in the era where ion thrusters were the only thing that was there. No longer worked. They just didn't work because you no longer had enough thrust to overcome mass. So obviously, moving something through space requires thrust sufficient enough to overcome the mass. You have to get it moving. So anyway, I added in, it's about an order of magnitude differential from mass. Volume stayed exactly the same, so I didn't change volume at all. So anyway, the demonstration here, this particular one, so it's 9.2 trillion, and you can see this particular container, fuel ice 01 in this case, has about 8 trillion in volume. Okay, so obviously a whole lot. And I don't think that's changed. I think it's still at 9.2 trillion is the game maximum. Because after all, why would you possibly need anything more than that? So anyway, these guys are obviously all full. This is my absolute maximum full. All you can have, and it's got components. It's got everything in it. So again, if we go into inventory and look at, so we have uranium and ice. We have all the different ores. We have all the different ingots, and we even have a lot of different, all the different components. So basically with this one pod, you would be able to do virtually anything you could ever possibly want to do. Bottles galore, even more fuel ice. So lots and lots of stuff. So this was basically a centralized repository that gave you everything, gave me everything that I could possibly want. Delete. So that's what the pods look like. The entire concept behind the pod was to have a customizable but modular system that I could use anywhere. So I will likely carry on with that very same convention on this build. So I'm going to leave this here because I think I'm going to use it. That does mean that I have to add some more mods into this particular build, or I could eliminate at least 2 of those. Nothing I can do here because to use these I'm going to have this mergeless conveyor, which means I add in another. I think these extended conveyors are really cool. So this was from Drifting Thoughts. Drifting Thoughts hasn't been active in the community for quite a while, but their mods are still out there on the workshop. They're there. So this one I really like, which is still, at least at the time I'm doing this video, is still out there on the whoops. Okay, I don't have my browser turned on, so I apologize for that. But it's out there. Darn it. There we go. Okay, so what was the goal? I'm 30 minutes into this video, and we haven't actually started on anything, which isn't atypical. Okay, so really, what I wanted to do, what I started out doing, and I filled up my energy a little while ago, and then got babbling, and we're right back where we started. So what I want to do in this case is grind down this lower section, and what I could do is build it, bring in a build and repair system and actually do a lot of that. But I'm not going to. I'm just actually gonna grind it. I think this is all heavy armor, which is. Let me go ahead and I know I have a. Oops, character tools. I know I have an elite grinder, so I'm gonna go ahead and put the elite grinder in here, which is just gonna make this faster. So the goal here, and maybe I should do this. I'm kind of taking the spiral approach, and I apologize for the flashy. That's a. I'm convinced it's a space engineer's bug. There's really nothing I can do about that. So ultimately, I'm gonna take it off right here. Okay, so I'm going to revamp this whole section. So this is my Christmas tree topper here. So I really should go in right here. And I guess I could take these off 4 at a time, like I sometimes do. Oh, I know why those outer ones go, because they're light. They're light armor. These outer blocks here were actually a correction to. To describe what this layer of 2 here actually was the overhead of the station. So the station was actually 2 heavy blocks of armor, in some cases 3 or 4 heavy blocks of armor. So that was the overhead. This was the roof. So I literally just chopped this section, this thing right out of the original hostile environment base is what it was called. I actually had a lot of fun. I built it in quarters, which is to say I built a quarter of the base, and then I pasted it, rotate and paste together. Which simplified things, because in building, building a quarter of it, I could then create an entirely symmetrical base, which is what I wanted. This is where having a stupidly large inventory on your character becomes paramount, because you don't have to stop every 35 seconds to deposit your inventory. And again, I apologize for this flashy. Nothing I can do about it. I've tried every settings, every setting, all the way down to low, and it doesn't matter. So this is clearly something that I want to say space engineers have screwed up, but that would be an obvious statement, a statement of fact. Doing the spiral approach here, doing everything. Oh, right. So the reason I left this this container down here, which is an elsewhere container, is for this reason. Is to give myself a place where I can dump everything and not have to worry about. It's a single container, yes, Is it cheaty cheaty? Yes. But it gives me a single place to put everything, and then when I want to move that, if I want to move that elsewhere, then I can. And that was not a pun. That's not why I called that an elsewhere container. For those of you who aren't who aren't familiar with the spelling that you saw there on the screen, that happens to be copyright to Bethesda Softworks. For those of you who ever played the Elder Scrolls series from Bethesda Softworks, that's what that comes from. The Khajiit. So the next short area here is the terms, the names and stuff are all copyright Bethesda. So I want to give them proper credit. They do have an awesome game. The Khajiit, which are very feline-like characters. Obviously, me and my affinity with felines. So I really like the Khajiit characters. So the Khajiit's homeworld, or Khajiiti, eventually that the plural of Khajiit being Khajiiti was I've never been able to verify this, but I think it to be true. It came in after a while, so here's more copyrighted material. Larry Niven and the Kazin, KZIN, and there's been a lot of argument over the years about, is the K silent, are they called Zin, or are they called Kazin? And because, to my knowledge, Larry Niven has never answered that question, then until I'm told otherwise, I'm not going to presume that the K is silent. So I've always called them the Kazin, which are another very cat-like creature. Now the plural of Kazin are not Kazins, it's actually Kazinti. So the convention, as far as I have been able to glean, now this may or may not be true according to actual Bethesda ZeniMax lore, but the calling of them Khajiiti appears to be the resultant of a lot of people reading about Larry Niven's Kazin, because Kazin equals Kazinti, so Khajiit equals Khajiiti. So anyway, that's my supposition, that's my presumption, because it makes sense, and I've never been able to find anything that actually admits that, but it makes perfect sense. Cat creature and cat creature. So I think it makes perfect sense. Okay, and I'm going to run out of power here, which I may be able to remedy right over my head, and I don't know if that's true or not. If this thing is actually working, which it is not. So I could fix that, and in fact I think I'm going to. So what I'm going to do here, and I'm going to change the color. I'm going to change this to this hideous color. Let me turn that right side up just so my OCD doesn't go completely bonkers. And we're going to go ahead and put a it's a small reactor I want here. I don't need a large reactor. No, I don't have any. Okay, I need to go down here anyway. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a bunch of uranium. My numlock key. So 500,000. While I'm here, I'll go ahead and put all this away. We're gonna go over here. and rejuvenate ourselves, which is to say add some power. And then I will get back to the thought process that I was blabbing on about, which is to say the Khajiit. So the Khajiit's homeland is called Elsewhere. Elsweyr is how it's spelled. That is their homeland. Okay, so I need to put the uranium into here. Whoops, uranium. Huh. I'm not sure why I can't get to that uranium, but oh, that's because I'm still connected, and those reactors are in here. Where did they go? There it is. They are turned off. So let me go ahead and take that out, and there should have been another one over here, which there is. I wanted inventory, not control. Still there, but it's not interconnected in. Okay, so that basically pulled out all of the stuff. Now, this was the control room. Now, remember, the whole goal here was to create an entirely vanilla environment. So I didn't have a lot of flexibility in using like Colt's control consoles, which I love those things. And they are actually turned on. I do have that mod loaded. And Colt's control consoles, they are, in my opinion, the be-all and end-all of control consoles. If I have any complaint at all, it would be really neat if somebody could add a compound type, and again, I wish Space Engineers had compound blocks. So, for example, this control console, from the very beginning of the game, this screen was blank. There's nothing here. So, why couldn't we have a compound block which, in fact, integrates an actual LCD display? Now, I understand the physics, which is to say the mechanics involved with that. So, for example, if I press K, oops, okay, so it doesn't. This is a control console. So when I sit in this seat, it has certain functionality. So how can I, given the functionality of an LCD display, get to the LCD display configuration aspects versus the control seat aspects? So I understand the mechanics. Mechanics would be very, very interesting, to say the least. So anyway, I was limited. Again, my singular argument with Colt is it would be really neat if there were embedded LCD displays. But again, that's a mechanics issue, a game mechanics issue, a game limitation, a limitation of the game engine itself. So I fully understand why that's not necessarily possible. All right, having said all that, I was grinding, so let me get back to grinding. So what I basically did was just made this, there's one on the other side too, but this medical bay is now active, is what I wanted to do there. So, okay, we'll pull out our grinder here and continue grinding. Oh! It's hypersensitive. Jetpack. so now we just separated all this out. Go ahead and chew away a little bit of this, and so we're kind of all right. Continuing on in the venue here. So again, back to the elsewhere story. My affinity with the Khajiit is the reason why I named those what I did, and the idea there was so. For those of you who may or may not be familiar with Khajiit lore in the Bethesda world, the Elder Scrolls world, I think I can bore right all the way through here. So do I have 2 levels of control station? No, I didn't. This was an observation deck. Back in the Khajiit lore, all the different clans of Khajiit were at one time independent, and one of the things that was noteworthy in Khajiit history was the fact that even though they were independent, they were not warring tribes. They were actually very cooperative. In fact, if you get into the lore, and everybody interprets Elder Scrolls lore a little differently, so I know there's probably a few of you out there that will argue with me on these particular points, and feel free, argue away. We can't, really have a discourse dialogue of any significant value without, first having a disagreement of perspective. So I always welcome opposing viewpoints. Opposing viewpoints is grand stuff. Having said that, these warring, or rather non-warring cooperative tribes, the reason why Khajiit are notorious for being the effective traders that they are today, which is to say later on in their history, is actually because they were very cooperative. So even though there were separate clans, they cooperated, they traded, and they, as a resultant, became very skilled at trading. Of course, Khajiit are known for being skilled in other areas as well. Oh, darn. Girders. Oh, I'm full. Darn it. Okay. Oh, drat. Okay, so I just fly right through that, which kind of sucks. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a reactor there, and we're going to put, in fact, an elsewhere container here. And then we are going to put, in fact, all of this stuff into this container. So what I'm doing here is putting in a localized place. We're going to add that there. We're going to grab all of the uranium out of that, and in fact put it in here. And now that I have no inventory, we'll leave that one for now. We'll come back to that. We want to grab this. All right. There they are. Glass. All right. And then we pull our grinder out once again and continue. Oh, hey, there's plate. So the fact that Khajiit learned how to interact with each other rather than warring with each other, I think says a lot about the Khajiit as a whole. So that's one of the many reasons, in fact, that I truly appreciate the Khajiit. Now, one of the things the province, which today is called elsewhere, and what I mean by today is obviously Tamriel as a location doesn't exist. So obviously I'm talking about a fantasy environment, but so what I mean by today is in terms of historic reference, that in their early history, in fact, before Tamriel was Tamriel, and again, all of this lore is copyright Bethesda, so this is all Bethesda stuff. So don't want anybody to imagine that I'm the one that created all of this and that I'm babbling about something that is my own machinations. Not at all. This is all Bethesda stuff.
Energy.
Oh, I'm out of energy. All right, so we should be able to now utilize. Okay, why isn't this working? That's really strange. Transfer to me. Oh. That is really, really strange. Oh, well, there's another. Huh. Okay, so obviously this grid has power. Well, here's some very quirky things. So, room number 1 is right here. Medical room number 1. Medical room number 2. Okay. So, we can see obviously the doors are in existence. They are powered. They're green. Okay. So between the battery and I'm out of power. Between the battery and everything, this grid obviously has power. But if we look at All right. So, attached. Oh. Okay. Actually, I take that back. Because the attachment points are top and bottom only, then these medical stations actually currently don't exist. So that was an oops on my part. Alright, so the only way to circumvent this is to build a battery. And yes, I know I'm cheating. But these medical stations probably are not going to be here anyway, so, or rather, they won't remain here. So what I'm going to do in this case is actually just build a medical station. Okay, so I was going to say this is a really, really strange bug, which it is, but it's not really a bug because it was just that the medical bays have a singular attachment point top and bottom. So even out here, for example, let me go ahead and just pull up a block. So I can't paste that block. I can't paste that block because that window is there. So I can paste the battery on the bottom, and I technically could paste the battery here, or a block on that connector port. But I couldn't paste anything anywhere. So here, it doesn't matter where on the sides. So that's just one of those unique things about a medical block that is somewhat inflexible in how it works. So I'm going to go ahead and tear that all down, and we're going to now that I've refilled myself. Oh darn! Get all of these things in here. I have an alarm going off in the background, and that's because I have a meeting this afternoon. Had a little bit of a stutter there. All right, I think that's all of them, and then we'll get these put into the inventory here. And that may actually be a good thing. So let me go ahead and, because I brought it out here, go ahead and paste the medical bay on the top here. That just gives me a place where I can recharge. And I don't have to go all the way over yonder to recharge. All right. I know it's really, really exciting to watch somebody else grind, so I will save you that pain. And I'm right about an hour here, so this is a great place for me to stop because I, after all, have to go to work. So, this is Kenty Tiger signing off, and thank you for watching. We will catch you next time.